Well, hello there, and welcome. My name is Brandon, and this is Spooky Folklore. Good evening, morning, and afternoon, everybody. How we doing today? Well, we got a great one today. I'm excited. We got our first interview, by the way, about our cryptid. I can't say it out loud, but it's by a gentleman named Tim who first encountered this cryptid when he was younger. There's police force got involved. They made a book of where he lived in Lintz Hollow. You can look it up. But let's just get into it real quick with this cryptid. I'm excited. Everybody should know it.
Cryptid of the Week.
Alright, if you have not already guessed what it is Bigfoot, aka Sasquatch. Hey, this thing gave me fears growing up like crazy. I as well lived in a hollow. Let's listen in real quick to the interview I had. Alright, in the studio we have a special guest from Tim. We'll be talking about his Bigfoot encounters. You can go ahead and start it off if you want.
Alrighty. Approximately 1975 to 1980, we lived in the small town of Lucasville, Ohio, located back behind, a lot of people's heard of, the maximum security penitentiary in Lucasville. We lived in a dead-end hollow called Lintz Hollow. This place, even to this day, is notorious for Bigfoot or sightings of such. So just one story that I have for you is when I was young, my father and my sister and I were fishing, and we come back home like around dusk, just starting to get dark, and my mom was upset. She was in the kitchen area. She was like canning vegetables, and she noticed that something at the bottom of the hill that met the back of our yard was squatted down with its arms around its legs, just watching her in the kitchen. So she went and she had a .38 revolver, as I remember, and she shot at it before we got there. When she opened the door, she said she thought before it could have been a bear, but whenever she opened the door, it actually stood up. So she seen it was extremely tall and hairy, and it took off up the hill, and that's when she proceeded to shoot at it. So at that time, my dad went and got a shotgun, and I could hear my dogs up on the hill, confronting it. I didn't see it, but I could hear it screaming and breaking branches. My dad actually shot at it. I'm not sure if he hit it or not. But just at that time, just wondering, you're asking your parents, what is that? I'm thinking it's a monster. And then they said it's more than likely like a Bigfoot or something. But, they acknowledged it by saying, if something on the hill wanted to hurt you, it would have already done so. So my mom said it didn't cause any, it wasn't meant to harm us, even though it sounded aggressive. But,
Was this all in Lintz Hollow?
Yeah, Lintz Hollow.
And for all those city dwellers out there, there's a difference between darkness and then darkness as in a hollow. Totally different. The darkness, the usually only light you have is like a dusk till dawn light, or the light's provided by whoever lives in there. But there's no street lights, there is no illumination whatsoever. Just kind of paint a picture for everybody out there. Hollows, if you live in a hollow, it's scary in general. Go on.
Yeah, we were the second house from the end. We actually lived in a log cabin with an addition built on. Pretty frightening as a kid for your parents, and everyone in the families has experienced something happening when they've come out to stay with us or visit. Long story short, the next day, when my mother went out back, there was blood on the back porch where either my mom had hit whatever it was, or my dad had hit it with you shooting the guns at him. My dog, I had 3 dogs. One of my dog's sides was ripped out. You could see the ribs and everything. So dog didn't live like halfway through the next day. So just whenever your parents acknowledge that there is something is awfully scary. So, needless to say, I slept in my mom and dad's bed for probably 4 or 5 years. I was scared that whatever it was going to carry me off in the woods. And like I said, I never thought about the word Bigfoot until all the people, my parents, the relatives, and friends, coined the phrase Bigfoot. So I grew up knowing from that point on what Bigfoot really was.
And what's kind of funny about it is living in Lynch Hollow, okay, has an encounter with Bigfoot. And then also, years down the road, there's also, you can look it up, there's a book published, and it's about, and it's the exact same one, the Lynch Hollow Bigfoot. You all should look it up. I would be absolutely terrified.
And then incidentally, after the evening, like the next day when my dog did die from the encounter we had, the sheriff's department was there. I was young. I don't know. There was a bunch of guys around everywhere. The only thing I do know is that they did pour casts of footprints. So the next day after the incident with my mom and my dad shooting at what was screaming on the hill and breaking large branches, it was so noisy. I do know, I was young, but I do know there was some sheriff members there, and I'm not sure who else. They had like a large, team of guys together. They poured like footprint casts, took hair samples off the back porch and blood samples. The last I know is that, hearing my mom talk, is that she said that the hair samples didn't match. It come close to a bear, but didn't match anything that they knew of. Pretty terrifying experience, but that's something I had to live with day in and day out. All the neighbors that had dogs is where he was attracted to. It seems like he would go where there wasn't animals, but it has been on our roof. You could hear it walking around, so it was a pretty horrifying experience growing up as a child there. And like I said, to this day, you can go up Lynch Hollow and talk to a number of people that's had similar experiences that we've had.
This wasn't the only time you had an encounter, right? Growing up, Lynch Hollow was where it started. Where you first started encountering the Bigfoot. Wasn't there the other location? Like encounter-wise that it's happened?
Yeah, just in a similar area. As adults, I was married. I had my cousin call me, and there's a window that's probably 7 foot tall off the back of their house because it sloped down. He called me at like 3 in the morning, said that he seen something looking in his window. So I had to physically go over and retrieve him from his house, and he would not go back there till daylight. So
and this is a guy, of course, both full-grown men who aren't afraid of anything. But especially his cousin, ain't afraid of nothing. So, for him to be calling in general, especially 3 in the morning, whenever it was, early in the morning, he definitely seen something.
Yeah, because he would never call me 3 in the morning. We both have guns. He was scared to even move out of his chair to go get his gun. So that right there was, I never really went back to his house after dark after that moment because, since I was a kid, I've always believed that there's something out there. Even in Lynch Hollow, my dad and I went back in the woods, real far back in there, and there's sandstone caves. Never seen my dad go in there. I went back with my brother. No one I went back there with would ever go into them. But, I look forward to someday maybe going back in there and taking a look around. Ben's just so close to where I am now.
We should totally do a live podcast.
Yeah, film.
Like straight up, yes. we totally should.
That way they can find the camera.
After
we're done disappeared.
Definitely during daytime though, not nighttime.
Yeah, no daytime. I felt safer during the day. We never had any encounters during the day that I know of, so it was always at nighttime. The boogeyman come out at nighttime. Terrifying experience. But from that point, we moved to the bigger city, and no worries about Bigfoot there.
But it seems like you couldn't win. We get Bigfoot's gone at this point because we're in this city. It's not even noted. No encounters or occasions with Bigfoot, and especially in the inner city. But then they end up. What was that movie? You end up watching a movie.
Oh yeah, one of my friends and his mom took me and my friends to the movies, and then introduced me to. I never even had cable in Lynch Hollow, so introduced me to Amityville Horror,
which notably is based on a true story and one of the scariest movies. And I believe it. What was it again? I believe it was the father ended up killing his family.
Oh yeah. So then I was worried about the house I lived in at that point. Modern and nice, but I was worried about doors slamming shut by themselves. So it was just a new fear from that point. But the Bigfoot thing is absolutely 100% truth. It just wasn't me as a kid imagining. There's been law enforcement involved, investigators, and pretty much anybody that come to our house on a regular basis has experienced something with it. So I'll live with that for the rest of my life and believe it's true 100%.
Like I said, we definitely at some point in this podcast in general, we definitely need to do a road trip. It's not that far from us. We need to do a road trip and find those sand cave and do an actual live, like a Facebook Live or Twitter Live, Periscope, whatever. We need to do a live one. So
Certainly.
I do have that external mic as well.
Gear up.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Head on in.
Alrighty, well, you heard it first here.
Phew. Just listening over that interview and what he was talking about as he seen it as a child, that would absolutely terrify me. I mean, I had similar dreams and had seen things, and yeah, that would that'd be terrible growing up. But like I said, my biggest fears, I as well lived in a holler as well, and I tell you, Predator was terrible. Predator scared me to death. I watched Predator once, and to me, if you want to compare Bigfoot versus Predator, I mean, I'm thinking any day in the world, Predator's got Bigfoot beat, or at least be a good fight. But now we're going to get a little more into the origin of Bigfoot, but the legend of it, here's how it begins. The legends of Bigfoot go beyond recorded history and cover the world. In North America, and particularly the Northwest, you can hear tales of 7-foot-tall hairy men stalking the woods, occasionally scaring lumberjacks, hikers. Bigfoot is known by many titles with many different cultures, although the name Bigfoot is generally attributed to the huge western region of North America. The common name Sasquatch comes from the Salish Sasquatch, while the north central region of the continent referred to the Witico or Wendigo. Other nations tell of a large creature much like a man, but with special powers and characteristics. North American settlers started reporting sightings during the late 1800s and into the 1900s, with the occasional finding of footprints. Bigfoot. Sporadic encounters and even a few grainy photos and videos adding to the mystery. Those who claim to have seen Bigfoot have described everything from a large upright ape to an actual hairy man, sometimes standing over 8 feet tall and described as powerfully built. The debate of research continues. Entire organizations exist to study the document Bigfoot and prove his existence, and groups regularly search the Northwest woods, looking for that ultimate proof. In one very real sense, however, Bigfoot does exist. The Western Air Force Defense System, the Western Air Defense Sector, Washington Air National Guard adopted the mascot of Bigfoot and operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, monitoring the skies of nearly 73% of the United States and Canada. Just like the Bigfoot legend, the sector is rarely seen and rarely heard, but rest assured it continues to observe and, if necessary, serve as a messenger of a warning. But we have an incident, though, that kind of, a very creepy photo, kind of brings a little realism to the story with a FBI file. The U.S. government released Bigfoot's FBI file yesterday, which would have been June 5th, I believe, 2019. It contains a few news clippings and some formal letters from a monster hunter in the 1970s, leading to an examination of 15 hairs and some skin the hunter believed came from Bigfoot. It appears that Peter, the monster hunter, first wrote to the FBI on August 26, 1976. His note, printed on a fancy letterhead reading the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition, suggested the FBI was in possession of flesh and hair belonging to the mysterious creature, possibly belonging to Bigfoot. Gentleman Peter wrote, "Will you kindly, to set the record straight once and for all, inform us if the FBI has examined hair which might be that of Bigfoot. When this took place, if it did take place, what the results of the analysis were. He didn't indicate why he suspected the FBI might have done such an analysis, only that from time to time we have been informed that the hair supposedly of Bigfoot has been examined by the FBI, and with the conclusion as a report of the examination that it was not possible to compare the hair with any other known creature on this continent. Peter appears to have been concerned that the agency wouldn't take the Bigfoot Information Center seriously. Please understand that our research here is serious, he wrote, that this is a serious question that needs answering. He also assured the agency they didn't need to worry about anything, implying their involvement in his work. As the examination of hair, or the opposite, by the FBI, does not in any way, as far as we are concerned, suggest that the FBI is associated with our project, or confirms in any way the possibility of the existence of the creatures known as Bigfoot, he wrote. Assistant FBI Director of the agency's Laboratory Division, J. Cochran, Jr., replied 2 weeks later, on September 10, 1976. Since the publication of the Washington Environmental Atlas in 1975, which referred to such examinations, we have received several inquiries similar to yours, he wrote. However, we have been unable to locate any references to such examinations in our files. Bunch of lies, FBI. You know it's real. More than 2 months later, on November 24, 1976, Peter replied, perhaps emboldened by the earlier response, he asked not for the information, but for a favor. Briefly, we do not often come across hair which we are unable to identify, and the hair that we have now, about 15 hairs attached to a tiny piece of skin, is the first that we have obtained in 6 years, which we feel may be of importance, he wrote. He asked Cochran could possibly arrange for a comparative analysis of the tissue to determine its origin. At the time all this was going on, Bigfoot was in the news. Peter had been searching for this creature for 5 years, supported by the Academy of Applied Science, a small institution in Boston that, according to the document in the file, also sponsors hunts for the Loch Ness Monster. The New York Times has profiled this 50-year-old man, Peter, his adventures in June of 1976, calling him former professional hunter in Nepal who switched from tiger shooting and yeti hunting, and yeti hunting. What's going on, man? My speech. From tiger shooting and yeti hunting, conservation, and Bigfoot hunting. Most Bigfoot sightings are eventually discounted, insubstantial, or faked. The New York Times wrote, but a handful hold up and are given high credibility. So far, Peter, though he was never seen a Bigfoot himself, has collected the details of 94 reported sightings that seem believable. There are many more reports of these tracks. The paper recounted several of those supposedly more credible sightings, and the clippings of those articles were included in the FBI file. The next document in the file, in chronological order, was Cochran's instructions to examine the hairs that Peter passed along. This does not represent a change in Bureau policy, but it's included in the file states as an apparent effort to justify the decision. The laboratory branch has a history of making its unique services and expertise available to the Smithsonian Institution, other museums, universities, and government agencies in archaeological matters and in the interests of research and legitimate scientific inquiry. Unfortunately for Bigfoot hunters, the results weren't what they may have hoped. In 1977, the lab examined the 15 hairs, and the final letter came from Cochran addressed to Howard S. Curtis, Executive Vice President of AAS. It reads like this. Dear Mr. Curtis, The hairs which you recently delivered to the FBI laboratory on behalf of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition have been examined by transmitted and incident light microscopy. The examination included a study of morphological characteristics such as root structure, scale casts. Also, the hairs were compared directly with hairs of known origin under a comparison microscope. It was concluded as a result of these examinations that the hairs of a deer family origin. The hair sample you submitted is being returned as the enclosure to the letter. Sincerely yours, J. Cochran Jr., Assistant Director, FBI, Scientific and Technical Services Division. Curtis replied March 8th, thanking Cochran and saying he'd pass on the news to Peter when the monster hunter returned from Nepal. I'm not buying it. That's my final say on this, is that I feel that the FBI is covering it up. As simple as that. FBI is covering it up. I mean, the first take on it was, FBI saying that they couldn't compare it to anything else. And funny, in that interview, by the way, with Tim, talks about how they took samples of it, but the only thing they can compare it to, if they could, would be a bear. Yeah, I'm not buying it, because the first instinct, they said, the first response was they couldn't compare it to anything. It was, and that never happens, they said. And then all of a sudden they get back and they're like, it was part of the deer family. Yeah, whatever. I think it's a cover up. And to conclude the cryptid of the week, Bigfoot, he's real. I don't care what anybody says. Forget that crap. It's real. Plus, I don't trust the FBI anyways. Just saying. All right. To kind of set the mood, we are today, by the way, talking about the great and one and only Banshee. But we're going to talk about the Irish Banshee and the Irish origin of this Banshee, and kind of set the mood a little bit. I got a little audio clip here for you of what a Banshee, sounds like, or has sounded like, or has been recorded, or somebody's heard. But this is what it is, and we'll get further into what a Banshee is, and then some sightings of you'll like. I don't care. This is eerie to me. Okay, let's take a look. Wait a minute. I'm on a podcast. Let's take a listen. Let's go for it. Yeah, you tell me right now that's something that if you heard that you wouldn't be running as fast as you possibly could away from it. No, this is probably one of the creepiest sounds I've ever heard. Ugh. Anyways, the Welling Irish Banshee. Ooh. So, the Banshee is a female spirit who lives by the river. They usually have the appearance of an old hag. No, not your grandmother. Sorry, Mama. I'm just kidding. But are capable of making themselves as young and beautiful as they choose. The Banshee is seen as the omen of death and foreboding from certain ancient Irish families, with names such as Fitzgerald, O'Neills, O'Connors, and O'Grady. In Ireland and Scotland, it is traditional for women to wail or keen at funerals. So if you hear the keen of the Banshee, she's alerting you that death is nearby. Alleged sightings of the Banshee ghosts are as old as 1948 and existed in Welsh, Norse, and American folklore. According to the legend, the 6 noteworthy families of Ireland, the O'Neills, O'Donnells, O'Connors, O'Learys, O'Tooles, O'Conahans, each had a woman spirit who would act as the harbinger of death. Having foresight, she would appear before the death weeping. It was believed that the Banshee sang such a sad song because she was a friend of the family. That's not a sad song. That is unhuman-like screaming that would have me running. Sometimes a Banshee would perch on a windowsill like a bird. Okay, that's even creepier. Where she'll remain for several hours or even days until death comes to call. Often, as the Banshee escapes into the darkness, witnesses have described a bird-like fluttering sound. Thus, many believe the Banshees are bird-like creatures. The Banshees also wails in other areas such as woods, rivers, and rock formations. In Waterford, Maganahan, and Carlow, there are wedge-shaped rocks which are referred to as Banshees' chairs. Since the other world of Irish mythology can be interchangeable in certain texts as either the realm of fairy folk or the dead, what precisely the Banshees were had not been determined. However, the belief that were women who died prematurely seems to be the most widespread belief, possibly to create an atmosphere of sorrow and grief around the spirits. But in mythology, the Banshee was linked to the fairies as being part of the mystical race. Tutha Dinadin. Let's just try it again. Tutha Dinadin. Which the fairies descended from. It just shows that through the Banshee is a commonly known figure. The familiar specter remains steeped in mystery, and there are many theories to account for Banshee sightings. Yet the Banshee is still one of a handful of mythical creatures that, although widely known over a diverse geographical area, is not commonly seen outside of folklore. Gallic oral traditions passed down for centuries, written only in the last 500 years, are the most common place to find the Banshee, such as the 14th century. Such traditions changed over time to include poems, nursery rhymes. That'd be a great nursery rhyme, wouldn't it? The Banshee came to tell you you're dead, tell you you're dead, tell you you're dead. And superstitions that have carried on to the 20th century. Although actual belief in such creatures is sacred Although actual belief in such creatures is scarce at best. Sin and superstition. Now, in the Middle Ages, the Irish truly believed in the presence of such creatures who were thought to watch over the families of the Emerald Isle. A Banshee would stay close to each family until all of its members passed away and were safely buried. Sin and consequences are also under the domain of the mythical spirit. If a person lived a life of selfishness or committed cruel acts during their lifetime, it was believed that their soul would remain close to the earth, suffering in penance. The Banshee would always be there to make certain that this punishment was carried out. Conversely, if a person lived a life filled with kindness and selflessness and good deeds, their soul would dwell in a peace and happiness forevermore. Although still tied to the earth, the soul would be contented. The Banshee would make sure of that. It was also common belief in Ireland that a particular banshee would tie herself to one individual family and serve as a singular warning. Thus, was thought that if the group of banshees were heard howling, it meant that someone as wealthy Irish clan was about to succumb to death's fatal charms. Each devilish banshee has her own mortal family. Unseen, the Lady of Sorrow attends the funerals and wakes the beloved dead. Although sometimes in the dark of night, during the vigil, her voice blending in with the lamenting wails of the mourners. Some of the Irish families, though, that immigrated to the U.S. seem to have brought their family banshee along with them. However, for the most part, banshee sightings have been limited to Ireland, where the banshee still grieves for the family member near the traditional family home, even in the person's absence. These deeply rooted superstitions kept the legend of the banshee alive through the centuries. As the myth of the banshee took hold, more details about the appearance of the ghostly apparition would be revealed. Some would see the banshee as a fearsome old hag, frightful to behold, while others would see a beautiful woman. In some cases, the banshee was reported to look like a simple washerwoman or laundress. Only the clothes she tended to were bloodstained, another portion of a pending doom for unlucky Irish man or woman. As mentioned, banshees can manifest in many forms and disguises, the most common of which is the appearance of a beautiful or ugly woman. But they also are believed to appear as animals like weasels, hares, or the hooded crow. These animals are commonly associated with witchcraft in Ireland. The banshee is often seen to be dressed in white or grayish-white gown while brushing their long, pale hair with a comb. It's a ghost comb. According to Romantic Irish legend, the comb is used by the banshee, and also the mermaids, to lure innocent souls into their doom. That's why people in Ireland never pick up any comb that's lying on the ground, even until this day. Others who have seen this creature described her as wearing a green, red, and sometimes black dress hidden under a gray cloak. The banshee is usually perceived as being quite fair, with long, pale hair that she grooms with a silver comb. But not like any silver comb, a special silver comb. According to superstition, finding a comb on the ground and picking it up is extremely bad luck, because a banshee has placed it there to lure the unsuspected and led them to the ruins. An old Irish poem refers to the appearance of the banshee in the morning. Hast thou heard the banshee at morn, passing by the silent lake, or walking the fields by the orchard? Alas, that I do not rather behold white garlands in the hall of my fathers. While this is recorded as a banshee is being heard at noon, she is however rarely seen and heard by daylight. Night is the time generally chosen by her for her visits to people. A banshee is similar to the Morrigan, the crone aspect of the Celtic triple goddess, the representative of death. Sometimes encountered in the disguise of an old woman washing clothes by a warrior on his way to death. The banshee is more often seen as a spirit keening a death in the night. Like a washerwoman, the banshee's appearance precedes death. The Irish deathbringer is considered to be a fairy or element spirit, but the banshees seen in the Americas are depicted to be more of a ghost or a ghoulish apparitions that are commonly mistaken by people to be the Irish messenger of death. Now, since we got an understanding of what this banshee is, let's dip down some of the stories they tell the youngins. An eerie memoir. One of the oldest and best known stories is that related in the memoirs of Lady Fanshawe, Scott's Lady of the Lake. As the story goes, in 1642, when her husband Sir Richard and she visited a friend who happened to reside in a resided in a castle. The regal lady was awoken by a ghastly and piercing cry. Then she beheld in the moonlight a female face and part of her figure hovering at the window. The apparition continued to exhibit herself for some time, and then vanished with 2 shrieks similar to that which she heard at first. The following morning she related with terror in her voice the incident to her host, who remarked, "What my dear Lady Fanshawe had witnessed and heard was a banshee, and her wailing forecast of death came true, as a near relation of my family expired last night in the castle." Another story, The Mysterious Castle. Set on the northeastern shore of Lough Neagh, Shane's Castle was commanding presence for many centuries. Originally known as Edenduff Carrick, the castle was restated to the O'Neill clan by King James in 1607. After this, it became known as Shane's Castle. Yo, that's Shane's Castle, man. That's Shane's Castle. Mary Lowry, in her 1913 book, The Story of Belfast, and its surrounding cities, Shane McBrien O'Neill as the owner of Shane's Castle, who would change the name and give 1722 as the exact date. The O'Neills then in possession of the castle were descended from the great Shane O'Neill, who became the O'Neill Moor around 1562 and ruled or controlled most of the Ulster. After his death, his many sons were known as the McShane. So is it like the McShane Castle now? The sons of the Shane, and particularly the Christian name Shane, was popular among his descendants. So the name Shane's Castle has many resonances and potential origins. Although the O'Neills held many castles, so it was O'Neill's Castle, and then it was Shane's Castle. Now it's became the McShane's Castle. Edenduff Carrick contains a stone carving of a head inset in one of the tower walls, known as the Black Head of the O'Neills, or the Black Brow of the Rock. It's thought that this stone carving predates the castle by some centuries. It is said the line of the O'Neills would come to an end if the head ever falls from its position on the castle wall. Luckily for the O'Neills, the tower containing the head survived their Banshee burned. Luckily for the O'Neills, the tower containing the head survived when their Banshee burned the castle. Man, I thought Banshees didn't cause harm. It's messed up Banshee. One source suggests the origin of the O'Neill Banshee lies in effort of the fairies. One of the early O'Neills returning from a raid when he found a cow with its horns tangled in a hawthorn tree. Single hawthorns are sacred to the wishing trees, and so the fairies now regarded the cow as their property. Foolishly, he freed the animal and incurred the anger of the Fae. When he arrived at his home, which presumably was not Edenduff Carrick, as built much later, but he had been where the Black Head of the O'Neills originally stood, he found that the fairies had taken their daughter to the bottom of the Lough, which is not specified, but the waters of the Lough Neagh were said to have healing properties associated with little folk, like me. The girl was allowed to return to let her father know that she was safe in the fairy kingdom, but she could only return then on an order to warn of impending death in the family by keening. This source names her as Kathleen, which is the Anglo-Norman origin, and so would seem to be much recent province than the ancient legend. Maeve is a very old Irish name, found in the oldest sagas, and appears more in keeping the apparent antiquity of the Banshee myth. The ending "een" is a common in Irish, and it's a affectionate twist on a name that would seem to reinforce the story that the Banshee was originally a daughter of the house. The ruins of the castle today are unusual, as the castle was in the process of being rebuilt in a grander style by Richard Nash. So that could be Nash's castle, architect of Buckingham Palace, among other famous buildings when the fire broke out. The conservatory was already completed and they survived the blaze while the main block of the castle was destroyed. Visitors can get a glimpse of the plans for the restored castle from the completed conservatory while touring the ruins remain of the main block, towers, and curtain wall. A fortified, studded with cannon salvaged from an English man-o'-war, stands guard of the shoreline. An interesting family tomb and statues can be seen on the grounds. The castle boasted an impressive series of vaults and basement chambers connected to a long underground passage, but possibly originally intended as a refuge or escape route. These vaults are now closed to the public. The Banshee was said to be heard in Coilal, Utah, the great word of Ulster, which grew by the castle on the shores of Lough Naga, and through which Shane O'Neill of, the O'Neill's castle at the time, has marched his army in 1565 on his way to defeating the MacDonalds. Okay, wait a second. Defeating the MacDonalds at the Battle of Glenataz? MacDonald? Kinda looks like McDonald's just took an A out of it. Kinda reminds me of Coming to America. Anyways, which cemetery his authority over Ulster? There's still a great wood left in the grounds of Shane's castle, although much of it has gone to farmland and housing developments. After the flight of the Earls in 1607, when the leaders of several Irish clans fled to the continent, thus ending the last of the Brehon laws and traditional governance in Ireland, some say the Banshee of the O'Neills followed the family into exile. However, the family line of the O'Neills is often unclear, and Hugh O'Neill, the last Earl of Tyrone, was the offspring of an illegitimate son of the first Earl of Tyrone, and his father's claim had been successfully contested by the great Shane O'Neill. So perhaps, even the White Lady of Sorrow, the Banshee of the O'Neills, remained at Shane's castle, and legitimate descendants of Shane O'Neill. After all, the black head of the O'Neills still stands on the tower wall at Shane's castle. Wow. Well, see that that's a very good idea. If maybe where the thought of what the origin of what Banshee came from, was the lady in the castle, the daughter of the king. Either way, I don't want to hear that stupid thing. If I hear, I don't know. Never. But that is all we have right now, today, on this cast. And I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I learned something. I learned a little more about the Banshee than I did previously. And that it sounds absolutely terrifying. And also, Bigfoot's real. And the FBI are liars. But if you have a story or comment, anything of that nature, do comment on my Twitter. Give me a follow there at Spooky Folk Tales. And again, that's Spooky Folk Tales. It's in the link anyways. I include it in the bio. But yeah, give me a follow. See what I'm doing. I post more than just my podcast on my profile. See what I'm up to for that day. Probably working. But it's been great talking to you all. Hope you enjoyed it all. And don't forget to give a review of some sort. Let me know how I'm doing. I'll never know if you never say anything. But till next time, you guys be safe out there with all these cryptids running around.